The morning sun cast long shadows across the private airfield as a man in his late 30s walked through the parking lot. Andre Wilson wasn't dressed like someone who belonged there. His worn jeans had a small tear near the knee. His hoodie had faded from too many washes, and his sneakers showed the miles they'd traveled. But he walked with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Andre had just come from the community center in his old neighborhood. He'd spent the morning helping kids learn to code, something he did every week. He hadn't bothered to change his clothes before heading to the airfield. Why would he? Comfort mattered more to him than appearances. The sleek private jets lined up on the tarmac gleamed in the sunlight. Each aircraft represented millions of dollars, the kind of luxury that most people only see in movies. Security guards stood at attention, and staff in crisp uniforms moved with purpose. This was a place for the wealthy, the powerful. A world, apart from the community center Andre had just left. As he approached the entrance to the private terminal, Andre noticed how the security guard's eyes followed him. It was a look he knew well, the subtle calculation of whether he belonged, whether he posed a threat. The guard's hand moved slightly closer to his radio. Andre pretended not to notice. "Good morning," Andre said with a smile as he reached the entrance. "Beautiful day for flying." The guard's response was professional but cool. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here for my plane," Andre said. "Should be ready for takeoff in about 30 minutes. The guard's expression shifted slightly. A barely concealed disbelief. "Your plane, sir? May I see your identification and paperwork?" Andre reached into his pocket and pulled out his driver's license. "My flight plan should be registered. The plane's registered under Innovation Technologies." The guard studied the license, then looked back at Andre. The mismatch between the man's appearance and his claim hung in the air between them. "Wait here, please," the guard said finally, stepping inside the terminal building with Andre's license in hand. Through the glass doors, Andre could see the guard speaking to someone at the desk, both of them glancing back at him. He'd been through this before. Different places, different faces, but always the same underlying assumption that he couldn't possibly belong in spaces like this. After a few minutes, a woman in a blazer with the airfield's logo embroidered on the breast pocket came out. Her smile was tight and didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, sir. I'm Diane, the customer service manager. There seems to be some confusion. We don't have any record of a flight plan under your name, and we don't have any aircraft registered to you or Innovation Technologies." Andre nodded, patiently. "The registration might be under Innotech Holdings. That's our parent company." Diane's smile remained fixed. "I've checked under all possible variations, sir. Perhaps you're at the wrong airfield? Madison Regional is about 15 miles east of here." "I'm not confused about which airfield my plane is at," Andre said calmly. "I was here last week. The G650, tail number NT788. A flicker of recognition crossed Diane's face at the mention of the tail number, but her expression quickly reset. "That aircraft belongs to one of our most valued clients, sir. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." "Bye." Now 2 more staff members had appeared nearby, not obviously watching but positioned to intervene if necessary. Andre recognized the choreography of security, the casual positioning that would allow them to surround him in seconds if needed. "There's no misunderstanding," Andre said. "I'm the owner of Innotech Holdings, and that G650 belongs to my company. I have a meeting in Chicago in 3 hours, and my pilot should be here already." One of the nearby staff members, a young man in his 20s, snickered just loudly enough to be heard. Diane shot him a warning glance, but the damage was done. The atmosphere had shifted from polite disbelief to barely disguised mockery. "Sir," Diane said, her tone now that of someone speaking to a child or a confused elderly person, "that aircraft costs over $60 million. Its owner is a very prominent businessman. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before we need to call security." Andre looked at her for a long moment. He could feel his heart rate increasing, the familiar burn of indignation rising in his chest. 20 years of building his company from nothing, of overcoming every obstacle, of proving himself again and again, and still, he had to deal with this. But anger wouldn't help him now. It never did. The owner of that aircraft is indeed a businessman, he said quietly. I'm that businessman. My name is Andre Wilson. I founded Innotech 15 years ago in my cousin's garage. Last year, we went public with a valuation of just over $2 billion. And yes, I'm standing here in old jeans and a hoodie, because I just came from teaching coding to kids in the neighborhood where I grew up, and I didn't see the need to put on a suit just to sit in my own plane. Diane's smile had vanished now, replaced by uncertainty. The staff members nearby had gone still. But Andre could see they still didn't believe him, not really. He didn't match their image of a tech billionaire, and no amount of explanation would convince them otherwise. A tall man in a pilot's uniform approached from inside the terminal, looking confused at the group gathered at the entrance. Is everything all right here? He asked. Captain Reynolds, Diane said, relief evident in her voice. This gentleman is claiming to be the owner of your aircraft. We were just explaining to him that he needs to leave. The pilot looked at Andre, surprise registering on his face. Mr. Wilson? I didn't recognize you at first. Is everything okay? The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Diane's face drained of color. The young staff member who had snickered earlier took a small step backward. There seems to be some confusion about whether I have the right to board my own plane, Andre said, his voice level. Captain Reynolds frowned. There must be some mistake. Mr. Wilson is the owner of Innotech and the aircraft. We're scheduled to fly to Chicago within the hour. Diane's professional composure cracked completely. The system didn't. She stopped, took a breath, and tried again. I apologize for the confusion, sir. Sometimes our reservation system has glitches with company registrations. It wasn't the system, and everyone standing there knew it. It was the worn jeans, the old hoodie, the color of his skin, the assumptions that came with all of it. No problem, Andre said, though it was a problem, one he had faced his entire career. These things happen. The young staff member who had laughed earlier was now studying his shoes with intense interest. Diane was frantically tapping on her tablet, probably looking up who exactly Andre Wilson was and calculating how big a mistake they had just made. Your flight plan is all set, Mr. Wilson, Captain Reynolds said. The crew is doing the final checks now. Would you like to board, or would you prefer to wait in the private lounge? I'll board now, Andre said. I have some work to finish before we take off. As they walked across the tarmac toward the gleaming white jet with its distinctive tail, Number Captain Reynolds spoke quietly. I'm sorry about that, sir. That shouldn't have happened. Andre nodded. It's not the first time. Probably won't be the last. The captain looked uncomfortable. If you want to file a complaint. What would that accomplish? Andre asked. Make a few people take sensitivity training? Make them more careful around people who look like they might be rich instead of people who look like me? He shook his head. Better to just prove them wrong by doing what I do. As they approached the aircraft, Andre looked back at the terminal building. Diane was still standing at the entrance watching them. The security guard who had first stopped Andre was speaking into his radio, probably explaining the situation to his supervisor. Andre thought about all the times in his life when he'd been judged based on how he looked rather than who he was. From teachers who assumed he wasn't college material, to venture capitalists who couldn't imagine he had created the technology he was pitching, to moments like this, being treated like an intruder when trying to board his own plane. Each time, he had the same choice, to let anger consume him or to move forward with dignity. He had chosen dignity every time, not because the anger wasn't justified, but because his goals were more important than his feelings in that moment. The gleaming stairway to the aircraft lowered automatically as they approached. The interior would be all soft leather and polished wood, with every luxury imaginable. Andre had helped design it himself, proud of what he had accomplished, but sometimes still surprised by his own success. As he climbed the stairs, Andre knew the story of what had just happened would spread throughout the airfield within hours. The staff would discover exactly who he was, one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs of his generation, a major philanthropist, a man whose innovations had changed how entire industries functioned. They would feel embarrassed, perhaps, even ashamed. But would it change anything? Would the next person who looked like him, who dressed like him, be treated any differently if they walked into that terminal tomorrow? Andre doubted it. Change came slowly, one interaction at a time. At the top of the stairs, he paused and looked back at the airfield, at the people still watching him. He raised his hand in a small wave, then stepped inside his plane. The staff would soon learn who he really was. But the real lesson, if they were willing to learn it, was about who they were, and how quickly they judged a book by its cover. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Andre stood at the bottom of the aircraft steps, his expression calm despite the growing crowd of airfield staff gathering around him. The lead attendant, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a perfectly pressed uniform, stepped forward with the confident air of someone used to dealing with difficult situations. "Sir, I need to ask you to step away from the aircraft," he said, his tone firm but not yet hostile. "This is a private jet awaiting its owner. There's clearly been some misunderstanding." Andre took a deep breath. He'd faced this kind of situation before, too many times to count. Each time he had to make the same choice: escalate or educate. Fighting fire with fire rarely worked in his experience. "There's no misunderstanding," Andre replied evenly. "My name is Andre Wilson. I'm the founder and CEO of Innotech. This is my company's aircraft." A younger attendant standing nearby failed to suppress a snort of disbelief. "Innotech? Never heard of it." "It's a software and AI development company," Andre explained, maintaining his composure. "We're headquartered in Oakland with offices in Chicago and Austin." The lead attendant's expression softened into something that looked almost like pity. "Sir, this aircraft belongs to one of our most valued clients. I'm sure you understand we take security very seriously here. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have to call security." Andre noticed a few of the ground crew exchanging glances. One mouthed something to another, and they both smirked. He felt the familiar burn of frustration rising in his chest, but kept his voice level. "I understand you're doing your job," he said, "but I'm telling you that I own this aircraft. If you check your records, you'll see it's registered to Innotech Holdings, which is my company." "Look, buddy," another staff member cut in, a stocky man with a name tag reading Mike. "We deal with high-profile clients every day. We know who owns this plane, and with all due respect, it's not you. So how about you move along before this gets embarrassing?" The comment hung in the air. Too late, Andre thought. It's already embarrassing, just not for me. A small crowd had gathered now. Pilots, ground crew, other staff members. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. A few openly hostile. Andre was acutely aware of being the only black person in sight. "I'd like to speak with your manager," Andre said calmly. "Already called him," the lead attendant replied. "He's on his way, along with security." As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared walking briskly across the tarmac. Andre felt his heart rate increase slightly. He'd done nothing wrong, yet here he was, being treated like a criminal for trying to board his own plane. A memory flashed through his mind. His father teaching him how to handle situations like this when he was just 12 years old. "Keep your hands visible," his dad had told him. "Speak clearly, stay calm. Remember, you have every right to be where you are, but not everyone will see it that way." 26 years later, that advice still formed the core of his strategy for navigating a world that too often judged him by his appearance rather than his character or accomplishments. The security guards arrived, positioning themselves on either side of Andre. Both were tall, fit men with stern expressions and hands resting near their belts. "What seems to be the problem here?" one of them asked, addressing the lead attendant rather than Andre. "This gentleman is claiming to be the owner of this aircraft," the attendant explained. "Says it belongs to his company, Innotech or something. I've never heard of it. And it doesn't match our records for this plane." The security guard turned to Andre. "Sir, can I see some identification, please?" Andre slowly reached into his back pocket and removed his wallet, conscious of how the guards tensed slightly at his movement. He pulled out his driver's license and company ID card, handing them over. The guard examined them carefully. "Andre Wilson," he read aloud, "CEO, Innotech Holdings." He looked up, studying Andre's face, then back at the ID. This looks legitimate, but anyone can get a card printed these days. Do you have any other proof that you're who you say you are? My pilot, Captain Reynolds, is inside the terminal, Andre said. He can verify my identity. Also, I have emails and documentation on my phone regarding today's flight plan. The second guard shook his head. I'm sorry, sir, but we can't just take your word for it. This is a multi-million-dollar aircraft. We need to be absolutely certain. By now, a man in a suit was approaching. Presumably the manager the lead attendant had mentioned. He was walking alongside Captain Reynolds, who looked increasingly concerned as he took in the scene. Mr. Harrington, the lead attendant called, out to the manager. This man is claiming to be the owner of the G650, says it belongs to his company. The manager, Mr. Harrington, looked at Andre with open skepticism. Sir, I'm the operations manager for this airfield. I personally know most of our high-value clients, and I've never seen you before. Can you explain what you're doing here? Before Andre could answer, Captain Reynolds stepped forward. Mr. Harrington, there's been a misunderstanding. This is indeed Mr. Wilson, the owner of Inotech and this aircraft. I've been his pilot for 3 years. Mr. Harrington looked from the pilot to Andre and back again, confusion evident on his face. Are you certain, Captain? Our records show this aircraft is registered to Inotech Holdings, Andre interrupted, which is my company. I founded it 15 years ago. We went public last year. Your records are correct. You just didn't believe me when I told you the same thing 5 minutes ago. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. The lead attendant looked at his shoes. The security guards exchanged glances. Mr. Harrington's expression shifted from confusion to embarrassment as the reality of the situation began to dawn on him. I see, he said finally. May I ask why you're dressed so casually? Our high-profile clients usually don't. He trailed off, realizing too late that the question only made the situation worse. Usually don't look like me? Andre finished for him. Or usually don't dress like me? Which assumption are we talking? About here? The bluntness of the question made several people flinch. Captain Reynolds took a small step forward, clearly trying to defuse the situation. Mr. Wilson comes directly from his community work sometimes, the pilot explained. He teaches coding to kids in his old neighborhood on Wednesday mornings. Mr. Harrington nodded quickly, eager for any explanation that might reduce the growing awkwardness of the moment. Of course, that's admirable. A misunderstanding, as the captain said. These things happen. Do they? Andre asked quietly. How often do they happen to your other clients? The ones who fit your image of what a CEO should look like? No one had an answer for that. The younger attendant who had snickered earlier was now studying the ground with intense interest. Mike, the stocky staff member who had been particularly dismissive, had backed away slightly, as if trying to disappear from the scene altogether. One of the security guards cleared his throat. Sir, I apologize for the confusion. We were just doing our job, trying to protect the aircraft. I understand, Andre said, though he wasn't sure they understood at all. You were doing your job. But ask yourself this. If I had been wearing an expensive suit, if I had looked different, would you have questioned me at all? Or would you have assumed I belonged here? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and unanswerable. Mr. Harrington stepped forward, clearly eager to resolve the situation. Mr. Wilson, please accept our sincere apologies. This is not how we treat our valued clients. I assure you this kind of misunderstanding won't happen again. But it would happen again. If not here, then somewhere else. Andre had lived this, seen too many times to believe otherwise. Different settings, different faces, but always the same underlying assumptions. I'd like to board my plane now, he said simply. I have a meeting in Chicago this afternoon. Of course, Mr. Harrington said quickly. Please allow me to escort you personally. As they walked toward the aircraft steps, the crowd of staff began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Andre could imagine what they were saying, expressing surprise, perhaps checking his name on their phones, discovering exactly who he was and what his company did, realizing the magnitude of their mistake. Mr. Wilson, Mr. Harrington said, As they reached the steps, his voice low and earnest. "I want to personally apologize again. If there's anything we can do to make this right." Andre turned to face him. "You know what would make this right? Training your staff to treat everyone with the same level of respect, regardless of how they're dressed or what they look like. That would make it right." Mr. Harrington nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. We do have diversity training, but clearly we need to revisit our protocols." "Diversity training is a start," Andre said. "But this isn't just about diversity. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, instead of making snap judgments based on appearances." A member of the flight crew appeared at the top of the stairs. "Mr. Wilson, we're ready for departure whenever you are. The cabin is prepared." Andre nodded. "Thank you. I'll be right up." He turned back to Mr. Harrington. "I fly out of this airfield regularly because it's convenient for my home and office. I'd like to think that the next time I arrive dressed like this, which I often am, I won't have to prove my right to be here." "Absolutely, Mr. Wilson. I'll personally ensure that all staff are aware. I mean, not singling you out, but making sure everyone understands." Mr. Harrington stumbled over his words, clearly trying to find the right way to express himself without making things worse. Andre decided to let him off the hook. "I understand. Thank you." As he climbed the stairs to his plane, Andre could feel dozens of eyes on his back. The confrontation was over, but its effects would linger. For him, in the form of yet another reminder of how the world often perceived him. For them, hopefully, as a lesson learned. Inside the aircraft, the luxury of the cabin offered a stark contrast to the scene that had just played out on the tarmac. Soft leather seats, polished wood surfaces, every amenity imaginable. All the trappings of success that apparently weren't enough to overcome the assumptions triggered by his skin color and casual clothes. Captain Reynolds followed him inside, closing the door behind them. "I'm sorry about that, Mr. Wilson. I should have been out there earlier." "Not your fault," Andre said, settling into one of the plush seats. "You couldn't have known what was happening." "Still," the pilot insisted, "it was unprofessional and disrespectful. If you want to file a complaint," Andre shook his head. "What would that accomplish? Make a few people attend a seminar? Force apologies that aren't really felt?" He looked out the window at the airfield staff, still gathered in small groups, occasionally glancing toward the plane. They know they made a mistake now. Whether they learn from it is up to them. The co-pilot emerged from the cockpit. "We're cleared for takeoff in 10 minutes, Mr. Wilson. Can I get you anything before we depart?" "Just some water, thanks," Andre replied, "and maybe a few minutes of quiet." "Of course." Left alone, Andre took out his phone. 3 missed calls from his chief operating officer, 5 new emails marked urgent, a text from his cousin asking about Sunday dinner. The normal rhythm of his life, momentarily interrupted by an all-too-familiar reminder of how the world sometimes saw him. He thought about calling Terrence, his business partner since the early days of Innotech. Terrence would understand. He'd faced similar situations himself. They often discussed these experiences not with bitterness but with a kind of weary recognition. 2 black men who had built a billion-dollar company from scratch, yet still had to prove they belonged in the spaces their success had earned them access to. But what would be the point? Terrence would be angry on his behalf, would offer support and understanding, but nothing would change. Better to focus on the meeting ahead, on the work that had gotten him here in the first place. Outside the window, Andre could see Mr. Harrington still standing on the tarmac watching the plane. Their eyes met briefly before the manager looked away, embarrassment evident even at this distance. Andre leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. In a few hours he'd be in Chicago, meeting with investors who were eager to fund Innotech's latest project. They would greet him with respect, with admiration even, because in that context, in a boardroom with his achievements preceding him, he was Andre Wilson, visionary CEO. But here, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, he had been just another black man who didn't belong. Until he proved otherwise. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very success that had earned him this private jet wasn't enough to shield him from prejudice. In some ways, it only highlighted the contrast between how he was seen and who he really was. The co-pilot returned with a bottle of water. "We'll be taking off in about 5 minutes, Mr. Wilson. Anything else you need?" Andre opened his eyes. "No, thank you. I'm all set." As the crew prepared for departure, Andre looked out the window one last time. The crowd had dispersed, the moment had passed, but its lesson remained, both for those who had judged him and for Andre himself. Another reminder that no matter how high he climbed, some people would always see him through the lens of their own assumptions first. Another opportunity to choose how to respond, with anger or with dignity. Today, as always, he had chosen dignity. Not because the anger wasn't justified, but because moving forward mattered more than looking back. Because proving them wrong, again and again, was the most powerful response he could offer. The engines began to hum as the pilot initiated the pre-flight sequence. Andre fastened his seatbelt and turned his attention to his upcoming meeting. The confrontation was behind him now, just one more chapter in a story he'd been living his entire life. But as the plane began to taxi down the runway, he couldn't help wondering, how many more chapters would there be before the story changed? Andre stood perfectly still as security approached. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, and a light breeze ruffled his hoodie. He could feel the eyes of everyone on him, the ground crew, the attendants, the management staff. Some looked smug, others uncomfortable, a few simply curious. But no one was stepping in to help. He had two choices now. He could get angry, raise his voice, make a scene, and likely end up in handcuffs. Or he could handle this with the same calm determination that had built his company from nothing to a billion-dollar enterprise. The head of security, a tall man with military posture and a stern expression, stopped a few feet away. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. This is a restricted area and you don't have proper authorization." Andre nodded slowly. "I understand you're doing your job, but there's been a misunderstanding. This is my aircraft." The security chief exchanged glances with Mr. Harrington, the airfield manager. "Sir, we've checked our records. This aircraft belongs to Inotech Holdings and is reserved for their CEO. Now, unless you can prove you're—" "I am the CEO of Inotech Holdings," Andre said, his voice level but firm. "My name is Andre Wilson. I founded the company 15 years ago." A ripple of disbelief ran through the onlookers. Someone near the back of the crowd chuckled. The security chief's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted slightly. More alert now, as if dealing with someone potentially delusional. "Mr. Wilson," he said, clearly humoring him, "I'm going to need to see some identification." Andre reached slowly into his back pocket, conscious of how the security guards tensed at his movement. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. "My company ID is in my bag, which is already on board the aircraft." The security chief examined the license, looking from the photo to Andre's face and back again. "This says Andre Wilson, but that doesn't prove you're the CEO of Inotech." "No, it doesn't," Andre agreed. "But a simple phone call will clear this up." He reached for his phone, again moving deliberately to avoid any misinterpretation of his actions. The crowd watched in silence. Mr. Harrington looked increasingly uncomfortable. The lead attendant who had first confronted Andre was whispering something to another staff member. Andre unlocked his phone and pulled up his contacts. He could have called his pilot, Captain Reynolds, who was somewhere in the terminal. He could have called his personal assistant, who could verify his identity, but neither would carry the weight needed to convince these people. Instead, he called his chief operations officer, Lauren Chen. He put the phone on speaker as it rang, wanting everyone to hear the conversation. After 2 rings, a crisp, professional voice answered. "Andre, is everything okay? You're supposed to be in the air by now." "Hi, Lauren," Andre said calmly. "I'm having a bit of a situation at the airfield. They don't believe I'm the owner of our plane." There was a brief pause. "They don't believe you're— Are you serious?" "Very serious. I'm standing on the tarmac with security right now. They're about to escort me off the premises." Lauren's voice sharpened. "Put whoever's in charge on the phone right now." Andre held the phone out to the security chief, who hesitated before taking it. "This is Head of Security Thomas Baldwin, Who am I speaking with? This is Lauren Chen, Chief Operations Officer of Innotech Holdings. The man you're about to remove from the premises is Andre Wilson, founder and CEO of our company, and the owner of that aircraft. What exactly is the problem here? The security chief's confidence faltered visibly. Ma'am, we have protocols for verifying identity. Anyone could claim. Check your records. Lauren interrupted. Tail number NT788. A Gulfstream G650 registered to Innotech Holdings. The pilot is Captain David Reynolds. The flight plan for today is Oakland to Chicago, departing at 10:30 a.m. Andre Wilson is listed as the primary passenger. Are you telling me none of this information is in your system? The security chief looked to Mr. Harrington, who quickly stepped forward and took the phone. Ms. Chen, this is Edward Harrington, Operations Manager. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. Our records do show the information you've mentioned, but what, Mr. Harrington? But you took one look at Mr. Wilson and decided he couldn't possibly be who he said he was. Is that the misunderstanding we're talking about? The bluntness of the question seemed to physically rock Mr. Harrington back on his heels. The crowd of onlookers had gone completely silent. Andre stood perfectly still, his expression neutral despite the satisfaction he felt at Lauren's words. She had been with him since the early days, had seen firsthand how often he faced these kinds of assumptions. Ms. Chen, I assure you, this has nothing to do with… we simply have security protocols. That… I'm sending you an email right now, Lauren cut in. It contains Mr. Wilson's company profile, a link to his official biography on our website, and several recent articles featuring him, including the cover story in last month's Tech Innovator magazine. I'm also copying our legal department on this email just so they're aware of the situation. Mr. Harrington's face had gone pale. That won't be necessary, Ms. Chen. We can resolve this without… It's already done, Lauren said flatly. Now, is there anything else preventing Mr. Wilson from boarding his own aircraft, or can he proceed with his scheduled departure? The manager looked at Andre, then back at the phone. No, nothing else. Of course he can proceed. This was all just a routine security check. A routine security check, Lauren repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. I see. Well, Mr. Harrington, I suggest you make sure your staff knows exactly who Andre Wilson is before his return flight on Friday. I'd hate for there to be another routine security check. Absolutely, Ms. Chen. I'll personally ensure that everyone is properly informed. Good. Now put Mr. Wilson back on the phone, please. Mr. Harrington handed the phone back to Andre, unable to meet his eyes. The crowd of staff had begun to disperse, many of them suddenly finding urgent tasks elsewhere on the airfield. I'm here, Lauren, Andre said. Are they letting you board now? She asked, her voice softening slightly. Yes. It seems the situation has been resolved. Good. I've sent you the latest numbers for the Chicago meeting. The projections look even better than we expected. Call me when you land. Will do. And Lauren, thank you. Don't mention it. That's what I'm here for, to handle operations. And sometimes operations means making sure the CEO can actually get on his own plane. Andre smiled slightly. I'll see you tomorrow. He ended the call and pocketed his phone. The security team had backed away, and Mr. Harrington was staring at his tablet, presumably reading the email Lauren had just sent. Mr. Wilson, the manager said, his voice strained. I cannot apologize enough for this misunderstanding. Please be assured that this is not how we typically treat our valued clients. Andre looked at him steadily. Isn't it? I wonder how many of your other valued clients have been asked to prove their identity on the tarmac. Mr. Harrington had no answer for that. The security chief cleared his throat. Sir, I apologize for the confusion. We were just following protocol. I understand, Andre said, though he wondered if they truly understood the impact of what had just happened. You were doing your job, but maybe consider that your protocols might have some built-in assumptions that need examining. Captain Reynolds appeared from the terminal building, looking concerned as he took in the scene. Mr. Wilson, is everything all right? It is now, Captain, Andre replied. There was some question about my identity, but it's been resolved. Are we ready for takeoff? Yes, sir. The pre-flight checks are complete and we're cleared for departure in 10 minutes. Andre nodded. Then let's not delay any further. He turned back to Mr. Harrington and the security team. Gentlemen, if there's nothing else. They shook their heads, still looking uncomfortable. Andre walked toward the aircraft steps, Captain Reynolds falling in beside him. What happened? The pilot asked quietly. I was finishing the flight plan when one of the ground crew came running in saying there was some kind of situation on the tarmac. The usual, Andre replied with a slight shrug. They didn't believe I was who I said I was. The pilot looked back at the group still standing on the tarmac, now huddled in conversation. Because of how you're dressed? That, and other factors, Andre said simply. Captain Reynolds shook his head. I'm sorry, sir. That shouldn't have happened. No, it shouldn't have, Andre agreed. But it did, and it probably will again. The important thing is that we're still on schedule for Chicago. As they reached the steps, Andre paused and looked back. Mr. Harrington was watching them, his expression a mix of embarrassment and concern. Andre raised his hand in a small wave, not mocking, just acknowledging. The manager nodded awkwardly in return. The interior of the aircraft was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the tense scene outside. The co-pilot greeted Andre with a professional nod. Good morning, Mr. Wilson. We're ready for departure whenever you are. Thank you, Andre said, settling into one of the plush leather seats. I'm ready now. As the crew prepared for takeoff, Andre gazed out the window at the airfield. The group that had confronted him had dispersed, but he could see them scattered across the tarmac, still stealing glances at the plane. Some were on their phones, probably looking up who he was, discovering that the man they had nearly had, escorted off the premises, was indeed the founder and CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the country. He wondered what they were feeling now. Embarrassment, certainly. Perhaps some guilt. But would it change anything? Would the next person who didn't fit their image of success be treated any differently? Andre had built his career on optimism, on believing that innovation could solve problems, that barriers could be overcome, that progress was possible. But moments like this tested that optimism, reminded him that some barriers were more persistent than others. The engines began to hum as the plane prepared for takeoff. Andre closed his eyes and took a deep breath, letting the tension of the confrontation flow out of him. In a few hours, he would be in Chicago, meeting with investors who were eager to fund Innotech's latest project. There, in the boardroom, his ideas would matter more than his appearance. But he couldn't help thinking about all the people who never got the chance to make that call, who didn't have a Lauren Chen to vouch for them, who didn't have the credentials to overcome the assumptions made about them based on their appearance. How many potential innovations, how many brilliant ideas, how much talent had been lost because someone didn't look the part. The plane began to taxi down the runway. Andre opened his eyes and focused on the meeting ahead, mentally reviewing the presentation he would give. The incident at the airfield was already receding in his mind, not forgotten but filed away with all the others like it. A reminder of the work still to be done, both in building his company and in changing the world it operated in. As the plane gathered speed and lifted into the air, Andre felt the familiar rush of leaving the ground behind. Below, the airfield grew smaller, the people reduced to tiny figures. The scene of his confrontation just one small patch of tarmac among many. From up here, it was easy to see the bigger picture. The landscape spread out beneath him, a patchwork of neighborhoods, industrial areas, shopping centers, parks, all connected, all part of the same whole. It was this perspective that had helped him build Innotech, seeing connections and possibilities that others missed. Maybe that was the answer, not to forget the small moments of prejudice and assumption, but to see them as part of a larger pattern, one that could be recognized and eventually changed, not through anger or confrontation, but through persistence, through excellence, through refusing to be defined by others' expectations. The plane leveled off, reaching its cruising altitude. The co-pilot's voice came over the intercom. Mr. Wilson, we're on schedule to arrive in Chicago at 1:45 p.m. local time. Can we get you anything in the meantime? Just some coffee, please, Andre replied. And maybe the financial reports Lauren sent over. I'd like to review them before the meeting. Right. Away, sir. As the co-pilot moved to fulfill his request, Andre took out his phone and pulled up the email Lauren had sent. The subject line read, Airfield Incident Documentation. She had been thorough, as always, not just sending the materials she'd mentioned to Mr. Harrington, but also drafting a formal complaint to the airfield's parent company. Andre considered it for a moment, then wrote back, Hold on the complaint for now. Let's see if they follow through on their promises to address this. Sometimes education works better than punishment. Lauren's response came almost immediately. Your call, boss, but I'm keeping it in drafts, just in case. Andre smiled slightly. Lauren had always been more direct in her approach to these situations. Where he saw opportunities for education, she saw injustice that needed to be confronted head-on. They balanced each other that way. The co-pilot returned with a steaming cup of coffee and a tablet containing the financial reports. Andre thanked him and settled into work, the rhythm of the plane's engines creating a peaceful background hum. As he reviewed the numbers, impressive growth projections, expanding market share, increasing revenue, Andre felt the last of the morning's tension fade away. This was where he belonged, doing what he did best, building something meaningful, creating opportunities, pushing boundaries. The plane soared through clear blue skies, carrying him toward Chicago and his next challenge. Behind him, on the ground, people were undoubtedly still talking about what had happened. Perhaps some perspectives had been changed. Perhaps some assumptions had been questioned. Perhaps the next time someone who looked like him walked into that airfield, they would be seen for who they were, not what they wore, or the color of their skin. Or perhaps not. Change came slowly, one interaction at a time. But it did come. Andre had seen it in his own lifetime, doors opening that had once been firmly closed, conversations happening that had once been impossible, progress being made despite the occasional setback. He took a sip of his coffee and turned his attention back to the reports. There was work to be done, a meeting to prepare for, a future to build. And in that future, maybe the call he'd made today wouldn't be necessary for the next generation of innovators who didn't fit the expected mold. That was the hope that drove him forward, beyond the small indignities, beyond the assumptions and the prejudices. The hope that each barrier broken made the path a little easier for those who would follow. The plane flew on, carrying Andre and his hopes toward the horizon, leaving the morning's confrontation far behind. The airfield fell silent as everyone watched Mr. Harrington, the operations manager, staring at his tablet. His face had drained of color and his hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through whatever he was reading. The email from Lauren Chen, Andre's chief operations officer, had clearly made an impact. Mr. Harrington, one of the security officers prompted, Is everything all right? The manager looked up, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning horror. It's him, he said quietly. It's really him. Who? Asked the lead attendant, the one who had first confronted Andre with such dismissive confidence. Andre Wilson? Mr. Harrington replied, his voice unsteady. Founder and CEO of Innotech Holdings. The company went public last year with a valuation of over $2 billion. They're pioneers in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Their software powers half the apps on your phone. He looked at Andre with new eyes. And he's standing right here. A murmur ran through the crowd of staff. Several people pulled out their phones, no doubt searching for information about Andre and his company. The security officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The young attendant who had snickered earlier was now studying his shoes with intense interest. Andre stood perfectly still, observing the transformation happening before his eyes. Just minutes ago, these same people had been ready to escort him off the premises. Now they were realizing exactly who they had been dismissing and disrespecting. Mr. Harrington approached Andre, tablet in hand, his entire demeanor changed. Mr. Wilson, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this inexcusable misunderstanding. If I had known who you were, That's just it, isn't it? Andre interrupted gently. If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently. But shouldn't everyone be treated with the same respect regardless of who they are or what they own? The manager blinked, taken aback by the question. Of course, he stammered. But you have to understand security is our top priority, and when someone doesn't match our typical client profile— And what exactly is your typical client profile? Andre asked, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. Mr. Harrington seemed to realize he was only digging himself deeper. That's not what I meant. It's just that most of our clients they tend to be wearing expensive suits, not hoodies. Andre finished for him. They tend not to look like me, is that what you're trying to say? The directness of the question seemed to physically rock the manager back on his heels. Around them, the crowd had gone completely silent. No, sir, that's not— I would never— Mr. Harrington trailed off, clearly at a loss for words. One of the security officers stepped forward. Mr. Wilson, I apologize for our actions. We were just following protocol, but clearly our approach was flawed. Andre nodded. I understand. You have security protocols, I respect that. My company has security protocols too. But somewhere in your process, assumptions were made that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with appearances. By now, several more staff members had approached, including the airfield's director, a woman in her 50s with a tailored suit and an expression of growing alarm. She pushed through the crowd and extended her hand to Andre. Mr. Wilson, I'm Diane Foster, Director of Operations for the entire airfield. I've just been informed of this situation, and I am personally horrified by what has occurred. Please accept my deepest apologies. Andre shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip and the sincerity in her eyes. Thank you, Ms. Foster. I appreciate that. If you'll allow me, she continued, I'd like to personally escort you to your aircraft and ensure your departure proceeds without any further issues. She shot a pointed look at Mr. Harrington and the security team. That won't be necessary, Andre replied. My pilot, Captain Reynolds, can handle it from here, but I would appreciate a conversation about how to prevent similar incidents in the future. Not just for me, but for anyone who might not fit your staff's preconceptions of what success looks like. Ms. Foster nodded earnestly. Absolutely. We would welcome that conversation. In fact, if you'd be willing, we'd love to have you speak to our staff about your experiences. It could be an invaluable learning opportunity. Andre considered this for a moment. I'd be open to that discussion. Have your office contact my assistant to arrange it. Thank you, Ms. Foster said, relief evident in her voice. We will absolutely do that. By now the crowd had grown, with staff members from across the airfield gathering to see what was happening. Andre could hear whispers rippling through the group. That's Andre Wilson. Inotech. They developed that voice recognition system everyone uses, worth billions. Can't believe we almost had him escorted out. The lead attendant who had first confronted Andre approached hesitantly. Mr. Wilson, I want to personally apologize for my behavior earlier. I was unprofessional and disrespectful. Andre looked at him thoughtfully. What's your name? Robert. Sir. Robert Collins. Robert, I accept your apology. But I'm curious. What was it about me that made you so certain I didn't belong here? Robert shifted uncomfortably. Honestly, sir, it was the clothes mainly, and the way you just walked up so casually. Most of our clients make a point of being noticed. They want the VIP treatment. You seemed different. Andre nodded. I was coming from teaching a coding class at the community center in my old neighborhood. I go there every Wednesday morning. I don't change clothes between activities because I don't see the need to present myself differently in different contexts. What you see is who I am, regardless of whether I'm teaching kids to code or flying to meet with investors. A woman standing nearby, a member of the ground crew judging by her uniform, spoke up. Sir, if you don't mind me asking, why didn't you just tell us who you were right away? Show us some fancy business card or something? Andre turned to her. I did tell you who I was. I said I was Andre Wilson, CEO of Inotech, and that the plane belonged to my company. What I didn't do was try to prove my worth to you through status, symbols, or name dropping. I shouldn't have to. The woman nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Captain Reynolds approached from the terminal building. Mr. Wilson, we're cleared for takeoff. The plane is ready whenever you are. Andre turned to the assembled staff. It seems my ride is ready. Thank you all for this enlightening experience. I hope it's been as educational for you as it has been familiar for me. Ms. Foster stepped forward again. Mr. Wilson, on behalf of everyone here, I want to express once more how deeply sorry we are for what happened today. I assure you, we will take concrete steps to address the underlying issues. I believe you, Andre said, and I look forward to seeing those changes in action. As he walked toward the aircraft with Captain Reynolds, Andre could feel dozens of eyes following him. The same people who had dismissed him minutes ago were now watching him with a mixture of embarrassment, respect, and curiosity. They're certainly singing a different tune now, the pilot observed quietly. Now that they know who I am, Andre agreed. But that's the problem, isn't it? The respect should have been there from the beginning, not just after they learned about my bank account. The sleek private jet waited on the tarmac, its polished surface gleaming in the sunlight, a symbol of success, of achievement, and yet, ironically, not enough to shield its owner from prejudice when he didn't look the part. As they reached the aircraft steps, Andre paused and looked back at the crowd, still watching him. He raised, his hand in a small wave, not mocking, just acknowledging. Several people waved back, eager now to make some positive connection. The interior of the plane was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the tense scene outside. The co-pilot greeted Andre with a professional nod. Good morning, Mr. Wilson. We're ready for departure whenever you are. Thank you, Andre said, settling into one of the plush leather seats. I'm ready now. As the crew prepared for takeoff, Andre gazed out the window at the airfield. The crowd had begun to disperse, but he could see them still glancing back at the plane, still talking among themselves. No doubt his name was being searched online, his company researched, his achievements cataloged and evaluated. He pulled out his phone and saw a text from Lauren. Everything okay now? Andre replied, Yes, the situation has been resolved. They've apologized profusely now that they know who I am. Lauren's response came quickly. Amazing how knowing you're worth billions changes people's attitudes. Still want me to hold off on that complaint? Andre thought for a moment, then typed, Yes, the director wants me to come speak to their staff about the experience. Might be more productive than a formal complaint. Your call, Lauren replied, but don't let them off too easy. This kind of thing has to stop. Andre. He put his phone away as the engines began to rev up for takeoff. He thought about Lauren's words. This kind of thing did have to stop, but how? Would his speaking to the airfield staff make a difference? Would sharing his experience change? Deeply ingrained patterns of thinking? He had to believe it would. That belief in the possibility of change, in the capacity of people to grow and learn, had been central to his success. It was why he taught coding in his old neighborhood every week, why he funded scholarships for underrepresented groups in tech, why he mentored young entrepreneurs who didn't fit the Silicon Valley stereotype. The plane began to taxi down the runway. Andre closed his eyes and took a deep breath, letting the tension of the confrontation flow out of him. In a few hours, he would be in Chicago, meeting with investors who were eager to fund Innotech's latest project. There, in the boardroom, his ideas would matter more than his appearance. But he couldn't help thinking about all the people who never got the chance to make that call, who didn't have a Lauren Chen to vouch for them, who didn't have the credentials to overcome the assumptions made about them based on their appearance. How many potential innovations, how many brilliant ideas, how much talent had been lost because someone didn't look the part. The plane gathered speed, pressing Andre gently back into his seat. Then came the subtle shift as the wheels left the ground, the familiar sensation of taking flight. Below, the airfield grew smaller, the people reduced to tiny figures. The scene of his confrontation just one small patch of tarmac among many. From up here, it was easy to see the bigger picture. The landscape spread out beneath him, a patchwork of neighborhoods, industrial areas, shopping centers, parks, all connected, all part of the same whole. It was this perspective that had helped him build Innotech, seeing connections and possibilities that others missed. Maybe that was the answer, not to forget the small moments of prejudice and assumption, but to see them as part of a larger pattern, one that could be recognized and eventually changed, not through anger or confrontation, but through persistence, through excellence, through refusing to be defined by others' expectations. The plane leveled off, reaching its cruising altitude. The co-pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Mr. Wilson, we're on schedule to arrive in Chicago at 1:45 p.m. local time. Can we get you anything in the meantime?" "Just some coffee, please," Andre replied, "and I'd like to work on my presentation for a while." "Right away, sir." As the co-pilot moved to fulfill his request, Andre took out his laptop and opened the presentation he would give in Chicago. The screen filled with Innotech's latest innovation, a machine learning system designed to identify patterns in medical data, potentially revolutionizing early disease detection. This was what mattered. The work, the innovation, the potential to make a positive difference in the world. Not the prejudices he faced, not the assumptions people made about him, but what he created despite them. The co-pilot returned with a steaming cup of coffee. Andre thanked him and turned back to his presentation, the rhythm of the plane's engines, creating a peaceful background hum. Outside the window, the world continued to spread out beneath him, vast and full of possibility. And somewhere back on the ground, perhaps a few minds had been opened a little wider today. A few assumptions had been questioned, a few perspectives had shifted. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough. But it was something. A small step in, a long journey toward a world where people were truly seen for who they were, not judged by how they looked or what they wore. Andre took a sip of his coffee and focused on his work. There was a meeting to prepare for, investors to convince, a future to build, and in that future, maybe the call he'd made today wouldn't be necessary for the next generation of innovators who didn't fit the expected mold. That was the hope that drove him forward, beyond the small indignities, beyond the assumptions and the prejudices. The hope that each barrier broken made the path a little easier for those who would follow. The plane flew on, carrying Andre and his hopes toward the horizon, leaving the morning's revelations behind, but not forgotten. Never forgotten. The tension on the airfield had transformed into an uncomfortable silence. Andre stood calmly amid a circle of staff members whose expressions ranged from embarrassment to shame. The revelation of his identity had changed everything. The same people who had nearly had him escorted off the premises were now tripping over themselves to apologize. Mr. Harrington, the operations manager, kept glancing at his tablet, scrolling through articles about Andre and Innotech, as if still trying to convince himself this was really happening. The security officers had backed away slightly, their earlier authoritative postures notably diminished. The young attendant who had laughed at Andre's claim was now staring fixedly at the ground. "Mr. Wilson," Mr. Harrington began again, "I cannot express how deeply sorry we are for this misunderstanding. If there's anything we can do to make it right." Andre raised his hand, gently cutting him off. "I appreciate the apology, but I'd like to talk about what happened here today." A ripple of unease passed through the group. No one seemed eager to discuss the obvious, that they had judged him entirely on his appearance and found him wanting. "I'm not angry," Andre continued, his voice level and calm. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened to me, and it probably won't be the last. But I think there's an opportunity here, a chance to learn something valuable." Ms. Foster, the airfield director, stepped forward. "We're listening, Mr. Wilson, please." Andre looked around at the assembled staff, making eye contact with as many of them as he could. Every day, people make split-second judgments based on appearances. Most of the time, we don't even realize we're doing it. It's automatic, unconscious, but those judgments have real consequences. He gestured to his worn jeans and faded hoodie. "I came here directly from teaching a coding class at the community center in my old neighborhood. I go there every Wednesday morning because I believe in giving back. in opening doors for kids who might not otherwise see technology as a path forward. Several staff members nodded, their expressions softening. I could have put on a suit before coming here, Andre continued. I could carry business cards with gold lettering. I could wear an expensive watch or arrive in a chauffeur-driven car. I could do all the things that signal success in ways people recognize. But why should I have to? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and challenging. The issue isn't that you didn't know who I was, Andre said. The issue is that it mattered so much, that the same person, me, was treated completely differently before and after you learned about my company, my net worth, my status. Robert, the lead attendant who had first confronted Andre, stepped forward hesitantly. Sir, if I may, we deal with security concerns every day. We have protocols to follow. It wasn't personal, wasn't it? Andre asked quietly. Would those same protocols have been applied with the same enthusiasm if I had been dressed differently? If I had looked different? Robert opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, again having no good answer. I'm not saying security isn't important, Andre clarified. I understand the need for verification, for protocols. What I'm questioning is how those protocols are applied, and whether they're applied equally to everyone. A member of the ground crew, a woman in her 40s, spoke up. Mr. Wilson, I think what you're saying is fair. I've worked here for 12 years, and I've seen it happen. The way people get treated differently based on how they look, how they're dressed, even how they talk. It's not right, but it happens. Andre nodded appreciatively. Thank you for your honesty. That's all I'm asking for. Recognition that these biases exist and a commitment to being more conscious of them. Ms. Foster stepped forward again. Mr. Wilson, I want you to know that we take this very seriously. We have diversity training, programs in place, but clearly they haven't been as effective as they should be. What recommendations would you have for us? Andre considered the question thoughtfully. First, I'd suggest moving beyond generic diversity training to more specific discussions about how assumptions and biases affect daily interactions. Second, create protocols that rely more on objective verification and less on subjective judgments. And third, foster an environment where staff feel comfortable challenging each other when they see these biases in action. Ms. Foster nodded, taking notes on her tablet. Those are excellent suggestions. Would you be willing to consult with us further on implementing them? I would, Andre agreed. In fact, I'd be happy to come back and speak to your full staff about my experiences, not just today but throughout my career. Sometimes personal stories can make these issues more real than abstract training sessions. We would be honored, Ms. Foster said sincerely. Mr. Harrington, still looking deeply uncomfortable, stepped forward. Mr. Wilson, may I ask, why aren't you angrier about all this? If I had been treated the way you were, I'd be furious. A small smile crossed Andre's face. Who says I'm not angry? I've just learned that expressing that anger isn't always the most productive approach. Sometimes turning a negative experience into a teaching moment can have a more lasting impact. He looked around at the assembled staff, noting how attentively they were listening now. The same people who had dismissed him 20 minutes earlier. Besides, he added, being angry all the time is exhausting. I'd rather focus my energy on building something positive than tearing something down. The young attendant who had laughed at Andre earlier finally found the courage to speak up. Sir, I want to apologize specifically for my behavior. I laughed when you said you owned the plane, and that was disrespectful. I'm truly sorry. Andre studied the young man's face, seeing genuine remorse there. What's your name? Tyler, sir. Thank you for the apology, Tyler. Can I ask what made you laugh? Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Honestly, it just seemed impossible. Someone dressed like you, claiming to own a plane worth millions. It didn't fit with what I expected. And that's exactly the point, Andre said, not unkindly. Our expectations can limit our perceptions. They can blind us to possibilities that don't fit our preconceived notions. He turned to address the whole group again. Success doesn't look one way. Innovation doesn't come from one type of person. The next big idea, The next revolutionary technology could come from anyone, including people who don't match your image of what a CEO should look like. Captain Reynolds approached, checking his watch. "Mr. Wilson, I hate to interrupt, but we're scheduled for takeoff in 10 minutes. We should board if we're going to stay on schedule for the Chicago meeting." Andre nodded. "Thank you, Captain." He turned back to the airfield staff. "It seems my ride is ready." Ms. Foster stepped forward once more. "Mr. Wilson, thank you for turning what could have been a terrible incident into a learning opportunity. We will take your words to heart and work to do better." "I believe you will," Andre said. He looked around at the assembled staff members. "I fly through this airfield regularly. I'll be interested to see if anything changes." As he turned to walk toward his plane, Tyler, the young attendant, called out, "Mr. Wilson, one more question if you don't mind." Andre paused. "Go ahead. Why do you teach those coding classes? I mean, you're obviously super successful. You could pay someone else to do that kind of thing." It was a genuine question, asked without malice, and Andre appreciated the directness of it. "I teach those classes because representation matters," he replied. "When I was growing up in that neighborhood, I never saw anyone who looked like me working in tech. I never imagined it was a path open to me until a teacher took a special interest and showed me what was possible." He glanced at his watch, then continued, "Those kids need to see someone who looks like them, who comes from where they come from, who has succeeded in this field. They need to know it's possible. And I need to remember where I came from to stay grounded in what matters beyond the business deals and the stock prices." Tyler nodded slowly, thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Thank you." Andre turned and continued, walking toward the aircraft with Captain Reynolds. The sleek private jet waited on the tarmac, its polished surface gleaming in the sunlight. "That was quite a speech," the pilot commented quietly. "Think it made any difference?" "Hard to say," Andre replied. "Maybe for some of them, maybe not for others. But you have to try, right? Otherwise, nothing ever changes." As they reached the aircraft steps, Andre paused and looked back at the airfield staff, still watching him. He raised his hand in a small wave. Not mocking, just acknowledging. Several people waved back, their expressions thoughtful. The interior of the plane welcomed him with its familiar luxury, soft leather seats, polished wood surfaces, every amenity imaginable. The co-pilot greeted him with a professional nod. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson. We're ready for departure whenever you are." "Thank you," Andre said, settling into his seat. "I'm ready now." As the crew prepared for takeoff, Andre gazed out the window at the airfield. The staff had begun to disperse, returning to their duties, but many still glanced back at the plane, their expressions pensive. He pulled out his phone and saw a text from Lauren. "How did it go? Do I need to make some calls?" Andre smiled slightly and replied, "All resolved. Turned it into a teaching moment, might even do some consulting with them on their training procedures." Lauren's response came quickly. "Only you would turn being profiled into a consulting opportunity. That's why you're the boss." Andre put his phone away as the engines began to rev up for takeoff. He thought about Lauren's words. It wasn't about turning it into a business opportunity. It was about making something constructive out of something destructive. About breaking the cycle of assumption and reaction that had played out countless times in his life and the lives of so many others. The plane began to taxi down the runway. Through the window, Andre could see the airfield operations building where, inside, Ms. Foster was probably already organizing a staff meeting to discuss what had happened. Maybe something would change as a result. Maybe next time, someone would think twice before making assumptions based on appearances, or maybe not. Change came slowly, one interaction at a time. But it did come. Andre had seen it in his own lifetime. Doors opening that had once been firmly closed, conversations happening that had once been impossible, progress being made despite the occasional setback. The plane gathered speed, pressing Andre gently back into his seat. Then came the subtle shift as the wheels left the ground, the familiar sensation of taking flight. Below, the airfield grew smaller, the people reduced to tiny figures, the scene of his confrontation just one small patch of tarmac among many. From up here, it was easy to see the bigger picture. The landscape spread out beneath him, a patchwork of neighborhoods, industrial areas, shopping centers, parks, all connected, all part of the same whole. It was this perspective that had helped him build Innotech, seeing connections and possibilities that others missed. Maybe that was the key to addressing bias too. Stepping back, seeing the bigger picture, recognizing patterns and connections that might not be visible up close. Not focusing on individual incidents, but understanding them as part of a larger system that could be changed with patience, persistence, and purpose. The plane leveled off, reaching its cruising altitude. The co-pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Mr. Wilson, we're on schedule to arrive in Chicago at 1:45 p.m. local time. Can we get you anything in the meantime?" "Just some coffee, please," Andre replied. "And I'd like to work on my presentation for a while." "Right away, sir." As the co-pilot moved to fulfill his request, Andre took out his laptop and opened the presentation he would give in Chicago. The screen filled with Innotech's latest innovation, a machine learning system designed to identify patterns in medical data, potentially revolutionizing early disease detection. This was what truly mattered. The work, the innovation, the potential to make a positive difference in the world. Not the prejudices he faced, not the assumptions people made about him, but what he created despite them. The co-pilot returned with a steaming cup of coffee. Andre thanked him and turned back to his presentation. The rhythm of the plane's engines, creating a peaceful background hum. Outside the window, the world continued to spread out beneath him, vast and full of possibility. And somewhere back on the ground, perhaps, a few minds had been opened a little wider today. A few assumptions had been questioned. A few perspectives had shifted. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it was something. A small step in a long journey toward a world where people were truly seen for who they were, not judged by how they looked or what they wore. Andre took a sip of his coffee and focused on his work. There was a meeting to prepare for, investors to convince, a future to build. And in that future, maybe the lessons he'd shared today would help create a space where the next generation of innovators, whatever they looked like, however they dressed, would be judged only by the quality of their ideas and the content of their character. That was the hope that drove him forward, beyond the small indignities, beyond the assumptions and the prejudices. The hope that each lesson taught, each mind changed, each barrier broken made the path a little easier for those who would follow. The plane flew on, carrying Andre and his hopes toward the horizon, leaving the morning's confrontation behind. But its lessons would remain, seeds planted in fertile ground waiting to grow into something better than what had come before.